Okay. All right. Well, sorry for technical difficulties. So welcome. I have to monitor the lobby here. Still got some people trickling in. So welcome to the 2026 Colorado Federal Lands Access Program webinar for prospective applicants. Going to let more people in here. Okay. So just a quick intro from me. My name's Andrew Valdez, and I'm a planner with Federal Highways, but I spent many years in local government, and in that time submitted a number of successful and unsuccessful FLAP applications. So I've been in your shoes, and I'm here to help you through the process. So we've slotted a couple hours for today. I've got about 45 slides to go through. So the presentation itself might run about an hour, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A after I'm done. We do have some housekeeping items and general disclaimers that I have to read before we begin. Except for the statutes and regulations cited, the contents of this presentation do not have the force and effect of law and are not meant to bind the states or the public in any way. This presentation is intended only to provide information regarding existing requirements under the law or agency policies. Please note this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on a public website. It's the Colorado FLAP webpage. And this webinar is geared mostly for local governments and prospective applicants. We're going to be hosting another webinar on Thursday for the Federal Land Management Agencies, or FLMAs. And I mentioned this because we do want to see the FLMAs and local governments collaborate on projects, collaborate on applications, but a lot of information is the same, so no need to attend both. And also just note that all the application materials have been posted to the Colorado FLAP webpage since about the beginning of the month. So those are all available, ready for download. And for those of you that might not be familiar with the Access Program page, we'll go over all that. And unless otherwise noted, Federal Highways and Adobe Stock used under license are the sources of all the images in this presentation. And then finally, this slide deck and video recording will be posted to the FLAP webpage. But if you have any trouble, just let me know and I can make sure you get a copy. Right. So general outline for the day, the run of show. So the mechanics of the call for projects and selection process hasn't changed. So if you've submitted an application before, this is largely going to be review for you. But for others, this could be all brand new information. So we're going to start first with an intro to my agency, Federal Lands Highways, who we are, what we do. Then we'll move on to a full rundown of the Access Program, or FLAP, A to Z. So you'll be a FLAP expert by the end of this. And then we'll get into the elements of the application packet itself. And then we'll close out with call timeline, some final items, and then plenty of time, like I said, for Q&A at the end. Right, so Federal Lands Highways. Basically, we are the Department of Transportation for the Federal Land Management Agencies and American tribal communities. So as I'm sure many of you know, about a third of the United States is owned and managed by the federal government, and our office plans, designs, and builds transportation infrastructure within and leading to federal lands. And we have different programs for each, which I'll talk about in a minute here. We do function much like a state DOT in that we deliver most of our projects, although we don't actually own or maintain any transportation assets. The rest of Federal Highways is under what's called the Federal Aid System, where funding goes to the individual states, and the FHWA division offices have a stewardship and oversight role with state DOTs and other local agencies. So anyway, Federal Lands Highways, we try to capture that in our mission statement here. And this is where Central Federal Lands, which is my office, sits within the broader U.S. Department of Transportation. So we're a division of Federal Lands Highways, which is part of the Federal Highway Administration. And you can see the Land Management Agency logos there, who are our main partners. And this map just shows how the country is divided into different federal lands regions. So we've got a central, eastern, and western. So once again, I'm in central. You guys are very lucky because our division office is here in beautiful Lakewood. This is where I'm based out of. So our territory includes those 14 states you see there, from California, North Dakota to Texas, and everything in between. These are our core capital programs. So today we're mostly going to be talking about the Federal Lands Access Program, or FLAP, and then to a lesser extent, the Federal Lands Transportation Program, or FLTP, and how those are supposed to work together. So these two programs were set up to address access to and then within federal lands. And ideally, they would kind of complement and support each other, and we'll get into that angle a little bit later. But the easiest way to think about these is FLTP is for federal transportation systems on federal lands, and FLAP is non-federal but provides access to federal lands. FLAP project we programmed through a call for projects, which we opened for Colorado earlier this month. And the owner of the facility, or the agency that maintains the facility, has to be the primary applicant. So typically this would be like a state DOT, or other local government agency, like the folks on this call representing counties or towns. But again, the ownership must be non-federal, or the local agency must agree to assume maintenance responsibility in the case of a federally owned route, like a forest highway or something like that. And again, we'll kind of unpack eligibility in a minute here. The FLTP is programmed by the FLMAs themselves, and we don't have much visibility into that process. We just deliver projects for them. So that's FLTP and FLAP. We also have programs for U.S. federally recognized tribes and emergency federal relief. Those are the TTP and the ERFO, but we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about those today. All right, so just a little bit more about my office, Central. We have those 14 Western states I showed you on the map, and some Pacific territories, including Hawaii. And we're not just about moving people from A to B. Our federal lands are, some of the national treasures, and the built infrastructure needs to take into account things like visitor experience and resource protection, right? And we're really at the forefront of delivering context-sensitive, outdoor recreation-focused projects like that. So, our federal lands, highways, transportation systems serve recreational travel and tourism, protect and enhance natural resources, provide sustained economic development in rural areas, and provide needed transportation access for tribal communities. So overall, we provide funding for more than 90,000 miles of federally owned and public authority owned roads which serve federal lands. Central and federal lands highways kind of fills a niche in the transportation infrastructure ecosystem, since again, our projects tend to be very unique. And we've got a deep bench both among our staff and the contractors we work with in those two business lines you see there, project delivery and business operations. So, from long-range planning, right-of-way and utilities, environmental clearance, project management, planning, and all those technical services, we really do it all, cradle to grave. We are a strong project manager-centric organization. So if you are selected for a project, you'd only have one sort of point of contact assigned in the project manager, and you don't have to navigate, a complex federal bureaucracy to get information or manage contingencies. We do operate under performance metrics. So first off, we are project funded. And that means we actively track our utilization rates. And we want to see over 75% of those dollars going towards projects and not towards administration and overhead. We also aim to obligate over 95% of program funds on a yearly basis. So we're not carrying anything over, year to year. really are incentivized to service the client. In this case, the local government agencies and the FLMAs. So really, trying to get those funds out the door and investment on the ground. We do have a number of contractors, our architecture and engineering firms on contract, but we do try to deliver a majority of our work in-house, and this keeps our staff sort of trained and up to date. And then as part of project closeout, we'll send out satisfaction surveys. Who doesn't love a good survey? And there we also shoot for 85% above. Okay, so moving on to the Access program. So this is a program that's authorized by Congress in national transportation legislation. So you've heard it referred to as the Highway Bill. First in MAP 21 back in 2012. And then the program has been continued through every transportation bill through our current one, which is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA. So EJA, or IIJA, authorized around $300 million per year of its life for FLAP from 2022, and then it expires at the end of fiscal year 2026, this year. And FLAP's purpose is to improve non-federal transportation facilities that provide access to, are adjacent to, or sometimes located within federal lands, with an emphasis on what are called high-use recreation sites and federal economic generators, which we'll get into a little bit later. All right, so we'll start with eligibility. So again, per the legislation, any public highway, road, bridge, trail, trailhead, or transit system located on or adjacent to federal lands is eligible. And improvement activities include rehabilitation, restoration, new construction, reconstruction, engineering and environmental compliance, operation and maintenance of transit facilities, and planning and research. But as I was saying earlier, title or maintenance responsibility in the case of a federally owned route must be vested with a state, county, or local government, or even a tribal government. So the non-federal facility owner, or FLAP, will be the primary applicant. And again, if it's a federally owned FLMA route, can be eligible if the local agency consents to maintain the facility through a formal agreement. So we can provide examples of those kinds of agreements if needed. There were some changes to FLAP under EJA. There did used to be a match requirement, and now local match is optional, but it can help in certain situations, and I'll kind of get into that angle a little bit later in the presentation. And there's expanded eligibility for what are called context-sensitive solutions, and these are projects that preserve scenic, aesthetic, historic, or environmental resources. So, think of like a raised boardwalk over a wetland, or an aquatic organism passage over a stream, for example, things like that. There's also eligibility for signage, wayfinding, landscaping, and other visual mitigations. Typically, those elements by themselves wouldn't be a competitive FLAP project. We would want to see the primary component of the project be, something that, expands access in a transportation angle. But now they can be included in a larger project package. All right, so these are some common eligibility scenarios on the map here. So at the top, you can have a road or trail that starts outside the federal lands and ends somewhere inside the unit boundaries. That whole alignment, the locally owned segment there in red and the federally owned segment in blue, is eligible if the local agency agrees to maintain or assume maintenance responsibility for the federally owned portion, the blue part there. This sometimes happens when there's a county or town that uses a road for some sort of secondary purpose, like emergency access, or the road leads to some sort of municipal facility like a treatment plant, or when the project is important enough for the local partner and they agree to absorb the asset into their inventory. Second one down is kind of the most straightforward scenario. You can have a locally owned road starts outside the federal lands and ends at a federal lands boundary, like at a trailhead or parking lot or a fee station. If the trailhead or parking lot is locally owned and maintained, all of those facilities, including the road, could be eligible on an application. And then there at the bottom, you can have a road or facility starts outside federal lands in short of the unit boundaries. That would be eligible as long as it eventually leads to some sort of public access point. Typically, we wouldn't want to fund something further than like 10 miles away from a federal lands boundary or an entrance, but it doesn't have to touch federal lands to be eligible. And, you know, just in general, the further away a project is from a FedLands boundary or access portal, the less competitive it's likely to be. Tribal roads maintained by a local tribe are eligible, but the facility must access some federal land management agency other than just the tribe. So tribal lands are not eligible federal lands as the destination for this program. So for FLAP, tribal entities are treated more like a DOT or a county than an FLMA. And then finally, land leased by the federal government is not eligible, must be federally owned. And this is another scenario that we see sometimes and might be relevant here in Colorado. You can have a state park surrounding a reservoir that's managed by Army Corps of Engineers or Bureau of Reclamation. Roads or even water facilities like docks and marinas leading to the water that are within the park. As long as it's not federally maintained, it's all eligible. And that's an opportunity for leverage funds to be proposed in an application. So say if like the state park is already planning some improvements, some transportation improvements, all those improvements could be bundled into one application for us to deliver, or the state park could just request FLAP funds and then use those to supplement a project that they're already kind of underway with. Of course, there are, you know, edge cases and odd projects and things that may not exactly fit the mold. So, you know, I'm happy to talk through the details of any specific project you might have in mind. Okay, so that's eligibility. Moving on to FLAP funding. So FLAP is allocated by a legislative formula, and this hasn't changed since MAP 21. Essentially, it's a function of the percentage of federal lands within a state and federal public roadway mileage by state. And this is how funding shakes out on a national basis. So Western states are heavily favored in this program due to the prevalence of federal lands. Colorado's federal land mass is about 36%. So Colorado's FLAP annual allocation is $16.5 million per year, and it's our second largest program behind California. You know, in the transportation world, that's not a ton of money, but if we're talking unpaved roads, trails, trailheads, planning projects, and then leveraged opportunities with other partners, that funding can start to go a little bit further. And we will typically program anywhere from 2 to 4 years of funding in any one call. So we could be talking, you know, $60–70 million worth of projects getting programmed in this call for Colorado this year. All right, so now on to funds leveraging. So the current transportation legislation did remove, as I said earlier, the local match requirement. But there are instances where it does make sense for a local or state agency to want to fund partly or mostly a project with federal aid dollars or other local funds, and then use FLAP as kind of a supplementary funding source. And then, you know, we could still deliver the project. That's not uncommon, and of course helps us expand the program in any one state. I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but generally if you've got a roadway where say half of daily traffic is accessing federal lands, and the rest of the usage is like local or through traffic, we would typically want to see commiserate local funding being proposed in the application. We don't use proposed leverage funds as a scoring criteria, but to the extent applicants can bring additional resources to the table, we can expand the program in the state, deliver more projects. So we do like to encourage that if it's a possibility. And here is the full rundown of eligible sources. So cash match with federal aid or local general funds is the most straightforward and preferred. FLTP projects can also count as leverage funds. Again, the FLTP is the program for federally owned transportation assets. I'll flag this for the FLMAs on Thursday, but if there's an FLTP project, on a national park or on a refuge, and the need extends beyond the federal boundaries, it would make sense to bundle those projects into one package for us to design and deliver. There's significant savings when we can do projects like that, and there's a place to indicate that in the application, which I'll point out. Unlike other federal grants, we can match FLAP funds with other competitive funding sources. FLAP is kind of unique in that way. So sometimes FLAP can be used to supplement funds that may have already been awarded in a larger grant program. So like say build or infra, if you're familiar. So that's also something to keep in mind. And we also work with the applicants to develop a payment program that's flexible. So if, say, for example, county was contributing general fund dollars on a project, they don't need to have all those funds available up front. And we do that through a reimbursable agreement and a payment schedule. And just to note, we can't actually receive private or nonprofit funding directly, but it can go through a pass-through like a local agency on the local government side. Okay, so here's a little bit more on the FLAP, FLTP leverage angle. As I was saying, these two programs can be kind of combined, and we do like to see that. There are some conditions. The Programming Decisions Committee, or PDC, and FLMA concur on the project, and I'll talk a little bit more about the PDC later. And again, of course, we'd want to see the projects be at least contiguous or adjacent to each other. And the project has to be managed as one delivery package so we can realize those economies of scale, right? And then in some instances, the PDC may require the local agency to contribute funding, but that's sort of sorted out on a case-by-case basis. And this is just a graphic example of how a joint FLTP, FLAP project could work. So say if you've got a $1 million FLAP job to improve a county road to the entrance of a national forest, shown there in the blue. And then separately, there's an FLTP project to improve scenic drive to the parking area, that segment there in red. Those projects could be combined in one FLAP application. And that really has benefits to all parties, right? The applicant has low or no cost burden. They can have us design and deliver the project. They get to claim leverage funds on the application. This is also great for us because it's much cheaper to deliver one larger project than to try to mobilize for two smaller projects separated by a period of years. And again, I'll make the FLMAs aware of this possibility since they are the ones that know about programming for the FLTP. So hopefully there are some projects that are already in the pipeline on the FLMA side that line up with needs on the local access system. All right, so moving on to project delivery. As I mentioned earlier, Central Federal Lands typically does lead and deliver selected projects, and there's a place in the application to indicate this, and I'll point it out when we're going through the application. But basically, this is because it is our business model. We were created for this purpose, and part of our mission is to deliver the program. So there are some exceptions to this, like major highway projects, bridge repair projects, or kind of specialty transit projects, but they are kind of relatively rare. If a state or local agency does want to deliver the project, there are some guidelines around that. First of all, there should be a justification for it. such as, like, say, the DOT is already underway on a project and they're looking for supplemental funds to expand access for like a federal lands access component to the project. We would also have the Federal Highways State Division Office and State DOT assume stewardship and oversight responsibilities. So there's some reporting that goes along with that. And then flat funds would then typically be set at a fixed amount. So say the PDC will come in and say FLAP can contribute up to X dollars, and then it's up to project sponsors to make that amount work. So the contingency risk is then on the applicant, as opposed to when we're delivering and, you know, we have to manage our own contingencies. So the project overruns, we have to come up with that shortfall. All right, so who makes the programming and funding decisions? So each state has a programming decisions committee, or PDC, and this is just a 3-person volunteer board that's established by a charter and made up of a state DOT rep, a local government rep, and then our office, Federal Highways, has 1 seat. And you can see the PDC responsibilities there. But essentially, it's their job to ensure proper stewardship of the program from a statewide perspective. It's not like, you know, their job to advocate for special projects in their districts or anything like that. Now, what you don't see here is FLMA representation on the PDC. Each state has what's called a technical advisory group, or TAG. We love our acronym soup in the federal world, right? So these are typically FLMA reps from regional or national levels, and they advise the PDC, but they don't actually have a vote on the PDC. So for this program, we give the asset owners final say, but feedback from the tags is important. So the land management agencies do play a crucial role in those kind of prioritization and deliberation discussions. All right, so moving on to preferred projects. So I referenced this earlier. Preference is given to transportation facilities providing access to high-use recreation sites and federal economic generators, actually written into the legislation. Federal recreation is defined as any site used by the public to recreate in federal lands. Kind of obvious, right? High use is defined for a region or an area, and not compared across like an entire state or the entire country. So not every county has the, you know, Rocky Mountain National Park or Grand Canyon, right? And then federal economic generators are defined as any use of or on federal lands that increases aggregate investment or economic activity for a local community and or region. So kind of vague, but you could think of like a ski area, energy production even qualifies, sites that have a regional or national draw or major employment centers. But again, the underlying ownership does have to be federal. And these are the kinds of projects that make up strong applications. So starting with full reconstruction or rehabilitation of a roadway, anything that expands modal access to federal lands, so like a new bike lane or a new multi-use path, wholesale bridge replacements, of course, things like safety enhancements, access portals, trailheads, parking lot improvements are also good projects, again, because they're expanding and enhancing access. Obviously, a lot of this is, you know, a judgment call, but if we see reasonable scope, realistic project estimate, and good FLMA coordination and support, the project will kind of meet the FLAP vision, and then that's going to be a strong project. We also love to see partnerships. Partnerships are really what make excellent projects when multiple agencies come together on an application. This can help leverage funds or local knowledge and address projects of mutual interest and greatest need. You know, oftentimes complex projects require a coalition of local champions to get them moving and funded. So, you know, the more partners at the table, typically the more resilient a project is going to be and the less risk it is from our perspective. And, you know, from our side, you know, our only goal is really to service the partners and do good projects that the public and public agencies want. You know, we don't really have, we're a disinterested party in that sense. So broad coalitions are always a really good sign in these applications. All right, so moving on to weak applications. We typically don't like to do maintenance-only projects. The purpose of the program is to expand access and not patch up something that's, has underlying flaws or to address a county's deferred maintenance backlog. We do also want to do complete projects. We wouldn't want to do a project where like an underlying issue or problem isn't addressed. So like if a road has an outdated design or poor subgrade, and those elements aren't addressed in the application, that would kind of weaken the overall scoring of the project. Of course, unclear, poorly written applications don't fare very well. Another one, make sure you pick logical start and end points. It wouldn't make sense to build, a 4-lane road that ends at a 1-lane bridge, for example. It's, pictures and maps are always helpful. So whatever context you can provide to clearly communicate the purpose and need of the project. We also have a section to add a link to a video file or record a YouTube video. And these can be helpful for us assessing the applications. And then, of course, we want to see the project meet basic eligibility criteria. Of course, we want to see good coordination with the land management agencies. Sometimes we see applications that are more like urban or rural commuter routes or neighborhood streets. And then the federal lands access component is sort of a minority of traffic counts. Projects like that can be eligible. But again, in cases like those, we would want to see commensurate matching funds since the access component is maybe secondary to, commuter or other local purposes. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the application and application process. So links you see there at the top of the slide will take you to the main FLAP landing page and the Colorado page. And there you'll see a map of the US and other info about the access program. So as you can see, Colorado is currently green, which means the process is open and we're accepting applications. Generally, we'll have a call for projects open anywhere from 70 to 90 days. And then we'll try to schedule calls every 3 to 4 years, depending on funding availability, and then our resource availability. And then other projects that we're doing in the state are multi-year program of projects. And the reason we do it that way, instead of like a yearly call, is because we don't want the size of a state's allocation to drive programming decisions. We would rather develop a quality multi-year program of projects. And we don't want to constrain ourselves to what's really an arbitrary, number that was established by that formula we talked about earlier. Okay, so if you click on Colorado, this is what the state's page looks like. And this is where all the application materials and call timeline is. I'll also post any updates here. So, while the call for projects is open, you could go ahead and bookmark this page. Information about your local PDC members is also here, in case you got a question for one of them. And this is also where I'll post the slide deck and video recording of today's webinar. All right, so getting into the application itself. It's a pretty light lift at 8 pages total. So if you've kind of already got all the information gathered, you should be able to knock it out in a day or so. We've tried to make the forms, as straightforward and self-explanatory as possible. And in the application PDF, I have provided like a lot of sample text to try and give you a sense of what we're looking for with each question. Make sure to take the sample text out and put it in your text, or just leave it empty if it doesn't apply to your project. We're not going to do this line by line. I'm just going to point out kind of the major elements of the application. And again, I'm available if you want to follow up with me offline if you got any questions. So first few pages are just kind of background data on you as the applicant and the project, the agency with ownership and maintenance responsibility, project length, and other data points like traffic counts. If you don't have exact numbers from counters, estimates are better than nothing. Field 6 is a bridge where you'd attach a bridge inspection report. Field 8 is really important. Want to flag this one for you guys. This is where you will estimate or provide some data about traffic counts and the percentage of daily traffic that is accessing federal lands. Again, if you have counter data, great. But if you don't, go ahead and make an estimate for us. This is one of the critical pieces that we do look at in evaluating the applications. And, typically you locals are going to know better than us the usage patterns. Field 9 is where you get into some crash and safety data. Again, if you don't have exact numbers, you can provide anecdotal information. And then field 10 is where you could indicate if there's an FLTP project in proximity. So if you have an opportunity to reach out to local rangers or park superintendents, see if there's any of those in the area. And again, I will make the FLMAs aware of this on Thursday at the webinar for them. Next page gets into information about the proposed projects. So this is where you can explain your purpose and need and alignment with the FLAP program. This is also where you provide a detailed description of the proposed work, including if the project can be phased. So phasing is another important one. Maybe we can fund part of a project, not the whole thing. So it would help for us to know what's most critical from your perspective, priority-wise. Next page is right-of-way utility and environmental considerations. Again, it's okay if you don't have all this information when you submit. If we do get to the point of sending a scoping engineer, they will flash out all of these details during the scoping visit. But you do have, if you do have information about right-of-way and utilities, those can be helpful for us. Your local public works or roads departments or state DOT can help you with these. And this is also, we'll indicate the proposed lead agency there in field 10. Again, typically this will be us, Central Federal Lands. Again, unless there's a compelling reason for another agency to assume the project. Next page is cost estimation and funding sources. So this part is really just for us to get a rough order of magnitude cost. It doesn't need to be a fully dialed in, engineer's estimate. And we provided a cost estimation workbook in the application materials that you can download. The workbooks are, a little technical. So if you have, a roadway engineer on staff that can help you out, that's, that could be helpful. You can also use your own estimating tools and workbooks. I'd say in general, be conservative with your estimates. That is, it's better to overestimate than underestimate the costs. And this is also where you'd indicate any leverage funds or non-flat funds, right? There's a text box at the bottom and you kind of describe that in narrative. And also here you could mention if there's an FLTP project in the area. And this is just what the cost estimation templates look like. We've got different tabs for different kinds of projects. It's an Excel workbook, so paved road, gravel road, multi-use path, parking lot, etc. Those all have different tabs. And we pre-populated the spreadsheets with formulas. So, whoever's doing this for you will just be entering things like quantities, and then you get an output for total project cost at the bottom there, and you'd put that into, page 5 here. Okay, so evaluation criteria. It's up to each state's PDC to set the exact evaluation criteria and the weighting of these categories, but it would be some configuration of these 9 things. Some are sort of a binary yes, no, and then some are scored on a points basis. They're all relatively straightforward, but I'll just run through them real quick. So federal lands access. We'll look at, again, proximity and significance. So, again, the closer, more nexus you have with federal lands access, closer you are to a fee station or a portal or a boundary, the better. High use recreation or federal economic generators, which we covered earlier. Expanding access for the most amount of people does, tend to score better with these kinds of projects. Public access. So that's kind of, getting into modal expansion and things like that. They're ADA and accessibility components that are being proposed and being expanded. Safety, of course, that's always a big one when there's, a intersection configuration that can be improved and improve safety for everybody. That's always an important one. Preservation. This one's more about asset management and state of good repair. And then, are you expanding the useful life of the asset or the facility? And then sustainability and environmental, what kind of impacts is this going to have? Is it improving water quality, things like that? Project cost and risk. Of course, we have to right size these things for the size of a state's allocation. And then how much risk is there in the project? Is this, something that's ready for shovels in the ground, or is it going to require some coalition building on the front end? And that gets, of course, into partnerships and coordination. If there's more partnerships, more resilience, more support for the project in general. And then all that kind of bundles into alignment with the FLAPS program vision. So when you're filling out the application, I would say just kind of keep these criteria in mind and then speak to them as much as you can. There are also these non-construction worksheets for projects that fall under the either transit or planning and research projects. And this is less quantitative and more narrative-based. If you do have a non-construction projects, I'd say the best ones have some sort of clear path lead to a future FLAP construction project. We don't want to do planning or research for planning or research's sake. I would say things like corridor plans, feasibility studies. We do a lot of those where there's a need, but you aren't sure exactly what the right project might be, or there needs to be some public scoping and engagement, consensus building before a project can proceed. I will say transit is always kind of a tough one, since FLAP is sort of a one-time infusion of capital. You wouldn't really want to try to stand up a whole transit operation with FLAP alone, since operation and maintenance costs can be significant and they are ongoing, right? But say if you've got like an existing, shuttle system operator needs some funding for some capital improvements or acquisition of rolling stock, those do fare a little bit better. And this is just the endorsement form for the facility owner to fill out. It's just one page, but it's just so that we know someone is on the hook to, assume upkeep of the facility once it's been turned over in a project. We wouldn't want to make an investment in a new road and then have the road be abandoned or fall into some kind of disrepair, right? And then similarly, this is the FLMA support form, also just one page. But this helps us see coordination, collaboration with the land management agencies. We wouldn't want to fund a project that's not in alignment with the management objectives of the unit, right? This is also critical for eligibility, so don't forget this one. And then lastly, there's just an instruction sheet, a checklist. This is just to help you guys stay organized so you didn't miss anything. That number 8 there is where you paste a link to a video of the project. Again, it's optional, but if you do have the time to do something like this, it can help you, sell the project a little bit and provide an opportunity to, communicate directly to the PDC. We do review those. Okay, so that's the application. And this is our timeline for Colorado. So, we'll have the call for projects open for 3 months. So from now, June through August, the end of August. We are targeting to have our sort of deliberative and review process complete by December, so that we can then have a shortlist meeting sometime early 2027. And then we would be looking at project scoping in probably the spring, summer of 27, so that we could have a final programming meeting by August of that year. And then that would likely give us construction of selected projects probably sometime in the 28, 29, 2030 timeframe. But all of that is really contingent on, the the details of the projects. So, those dates can move around a little bit. And this is the process if your project is selected. So first step is that shortlisting I mentioned. You'll get a notification letter from us, and then we'll set up some meetings to talk through financial arrangements if leveraged funds are being used. We also have an engagement letter that the project rep would sign, just so that we have, a point of contact on the local side. And then we'll work with you to set up, a site visit with our scoping engineers to refine those cost estimates and make sure we're still in the ballpark and there's no, fatal flaws with the project. And that the project still looks good. PDC will place the project into our final program and then work out a delivery schedule. And then typically we'll take it from there and deliver the project cradle to grave. And again, that's everything from, right-of-way utility, environmental clearance, NEPA, design, construction, all that, all the way to close out. I do also always want to flag this for you guys. There's really very little administrative burden on the applicant, as is, the case with other federal grants. That's because FLAP isn't actually a grant program, even though it sort of looks and feels like one. It's technically a formulaic program, that formula I showed you earlier. So we do the call for projects just for fairness and transparency. And then typically the funds stay on our side, assuming we're delivering the project. So once a project is awarded, applicant doesn't have to go through any reporting or anything like that. And like I said earlier, if another agency is delivering the project, there would be some oversight and reporting responsibilities, and that can get a little more involved, but again, project dependent. Okie dokie. So some final closing thoughts. Just want to hammer this point home a little bit, that FLMA coordination is crucial. Sometimes we do see applications where there's been, zero coordination and discussion between the locals and land managers, and it's news to them. So we want to avoid that, and as much as possible, work hand in hand in developing these applications to make sure that it's a project of mutual benefit. Program guidance for eligibility. Again, we kind of ran through eligibility earlier, but there are these edge cases, oddball jobs, things like that. So happy to talk through the eligibility profile of your project if you'd like. Test the forms early, download and save them. Make sure you know how to use, Adobe fillable forms. It's all on just the Acrobat platforms. And answer as many questions as completely as possible. Less can be more. Sometimes, we're going to get a lot of applications, I think, in Colorado. And sometimes applicants will just throw the kitchen sink at us. And we're trying to figure out, what exactly are they trying to tell us? Just use as many papers and ink as needed to communicate what it is you're trying to do and nothing more. Again, I would say, look at that evaluation criteria and have that in, kind of at the back of your mind as you're developing these applications. And then lastly, best data available. If you don't have traffic counts and things like that, anecdotal can be helpful, right? That's kind of, better something than nothing there. Don't let, good be the enemy of perfect, or however the saying goes. So anyway, that's my time. Thank you all. Sorry for the hiccup earlier on. We're, Colorado is kind of a special state for us, and we're really looking forward to some great projects here. And yeah, happy to hang on and answer any questions. So thanks again. Let's see, Anna, question in the chat. Let me, there's the chat. Okay. Do applicants have a cap of how many applications they can submit? No, good question. What we see it sometimes often where a county or a town will submit multiple applications. You can do that. Best way to do that is to say if they really are two different projects, submit two different applications. We don't want to see like a bunch of different projects try to fit into one application because then we can't really review it on its own merits. If you do decide to do that, at least let us know which of the two or which of the three is kind of your priority application. Because the risk you run there is we do a project and it's not your most important project for whatever reason it scores better. So. Some pretty good attendance here. What is the typical award size? Another good question. So, we are obviously constrained by the size of a state's allocation. And we do like our North Star is we want to spread out the projects geographically. We want to do, different size projects, and we want to try and get partner agencies and local governments, a variety of projects. So, we don't try to do just big projects in the metro area or something like that. So the project size for Colorado could be, all the way down to $250,000 for a planning study, up to, tens of millions of dollars for, a big roadway rehab, and everything in between. So again, we try to do that variety of projects. And I would say if in the back of your mind, you've got, Colorado is going to program upwards of 70 million. And we want to try to do 3 or 4 projects, in this call. How does my need fit into that kind of broader landscape? Let's see, Jared. Go ahead.
Hi, Andrew. Sorry, I was trying to go in the chat, but it wasn't letting me send it through. So I just had a quick question. So we have a 11-mile in Spinney or in Park County, and that's that gets hit with crazy amount of traffic. They're not considered federal lands; they're state parks. Would that still meet the criteria, or is that something then we'd have to figure out a way to connect it to federal lands as well from the state park?
Yeah, there does have to be nexus with public access on federal lands.
Okay.
Can be, state parks can be a partner agency, but it does have to have a nexus with federal lands.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Come on, don't be shy. Bob?
Yeah, Andrew.
Yeah.
I'm with Frontier Pathways, Scenic Byway, and we're very interested in helping fund a brand new scenic overlook, which is on the byway, but about maybe 10 or 12 miles from the national forest, which we go through. So would that be eligible?
Is it is the scenic byway within forest?
Oh yeah, yes, a lot of it.
Sounds eligible. We could look at a map, maybe offline.
Certainly. I'm assuming,
Yeah.
so I just wanted to ask.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great job. Very informative.
Yeah, good. Thanks. Let's see. I don't have a name, but Los Animas County.
Yeah, I'm challenged when it comes to putting my name out there. My name is Phil, but within your week, let me get that slide. Applications, there was something about mill and overlay. But then I look at your number 27 on the application as an example. It says existing road pavement is deteriorating with several drainage issues. Are drainage issues with an overlay something that would be considered or
Yes.
not?
Yeah, for sure. You could do, I guess you're thinking like a 3R type project. You could also propose drainage.
And then
You don't have to
also
do.
we have guardrail issues. It's on the Trinidad Dam is what I guess I was kind of thinking about. The road across it that also services the state park. So, all right, thank you.
I think I talked to some of your staff about that project. I think that's a strong project.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, Julia Kinch.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you. I had a question about the use of flat funds to complete a major milestone, such as engineering design, within a much larger transportation project. So it wouldn't be fully cradle to grave, but it would be a really big milestone for the project.
So this is something that is partially funded and kind of underway.
It is currently in design, but we are seeking the funds to complete the design for the project.
Gotcha. So eligible for sure. The more you can build a case or just speak to eventual delivery of the project from a construction standpoint, and you could even say, hey, we want to go for FLAP again in 4 years or whatever. We just don't want to fund, design on something and it just sits on a shelf.
Yeah.
So
Okay, because I mean the total it's a large infrastructure project. I've seen that flat funds are eligible for wildlife crossings projects. Wildlife crossings are expensive, so to do a system of wildlife crossings is that kind of exceeds the ability of FLAP. But certainly, I think that is something like it also takes a long time to implement that kind of project. So the likelihood of reapplying for FLAP for construction as part of a larger project fund would certainly be on our radar. But as getting a project of this size to that shovel ready stage is really important.
Sure. Yeah, the biggest factor there is going to be who delivers ultimately. And I will say with wildlife crossings, so I have seen some PDCs say, FLAP is intended for people and not necessarily for wildlife. So if there is some sort of people access component that you can build into your application, I'd say probably the better. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware that wildlife crossings have been listed as eligible since MAP 21. I know that FLAP has, I know they funded a project in Idaho. So there's been one successful wildlife crossings FLAP project out there that we're using as our model.
Yeah, I mean, for example, right, you've got a higher risk area and it is impacting people going to whatever, a national forest, and there's accidents and there's a safety problem there. Like a standalone wildlife crossing that doesn't have any benefit to people would rank lower than that if the wildlife crossing helps people accessing federal lands, the better it's going to fare.
Totally. We will highlight that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. Well, we've got 32 folks on the call. If everyone submits an application, that's a pretty full lid. Anyone else before we sign off? Jay Musser.
Yeah, I wasn't able to make the entire presentation. Is there a way this could be made available to us after this is all concluded?
Yes. Do you have the Colorado Flap webpage?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I will have it. I'll have the slide deck and recording posted there in the next couple days.
Hey, thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. Karen Rowe.
Yes, can you hear me?
Gotcha now.
Okay. How much is, you had said that Central Federal Lands does the design and the construction for the project. Is there a fee for that oversight?
No, we would just build that into our, cost estimate. So you guys provide us an estimate. If your project is shortlisted, we would, develop a detailed project scope, and that would include all of our time, A&E's time, and then obviously, the construction and everything else. So you would get, a detailed cost estimate, assuming your project is shortlisted and we've gone down the road of actually scoping your project. So it's all kind of transparent.
So it's something that if a community submits a cost estimate, then you just add on those additional elements later. It's not something the community needs to account for.
Yeah, don't worry about that.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
I think we have like a general contingency multiplier in the cost estimates that we provided, and that's just for everything, right? So
Okay, yeah. And my role right now is a regional grant navigator for Park Teller in El Paso County. So I represent lots of different communities there. So I'll see if I'm helping them with applications, but that's a good information to know. Thank you.
and I see Julia in our office, 12 to 15%, I believe, is what's hard keyed into the worksheet. But I mean, again, if you just give us a cost estimate with like quantities and things like that, we'll kind of handle the rest.
Great, thank you.
Ava. Hi, Ava. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
You don't sound like Ava.
I am not. I am Dylan. I'm the transportation planner, but we have one account.
No worries.
But I have a quick question. The project that we're kind of eyeing is the acquisition or either full acquisition or rail banking of an unused rail segment that would kind of help connect our river trail system that leads up to the dam in the state park area.
Mhm.
Is that something that we could kind of feasibly use flap funds for, either both for rail acquisition and for trail construction, or just one or the other?
So Julia can keep me honest here, but I think right-of-way acquisition is eligible. I think there are some complexities to that, but I think I know the project that you're talking about. Is it near the dam or is it in the city?
It's relatively close to our city park, but it's within, maybe 4 miles maximum distance from the dam, if that.
Would you also be proposing construction or just the right-of-way acquisition?
I think it would be acquisition and construction.
Yeah.
The goal being to properly turn it into a trail that integrates with the rest of our network.
Yeah, you'd want to do both. So yeah, I think that's good to go. As far as eligibility.
Definitely want Union Pacific sign off on it.
Yeah, that's the fun part. Rachel, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Gotcha, yeah.
Perfect, thank you. If we are applying and it would be possibly for engineering and construction, how do we demonstrate that we would be providing some match?
I think it's page 4 of the application, and it just says flap amount requested, other leverage funds available, and then you would put in the narrative where those other funds are coming from.
Excellent. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. So thank you.
Yeah, you bet.